Hello, FewCandy here and welcome back to Anima Zoo. And today we are finally adding in our first habitat with a absolute ton of landscaping, a little bit of building and a bit of planning for future development as well. So of course we actually need to put in a keeper hut and a veterinary surgery so that we can actually put in a habitat and have it be functional and potentially open our zoo as well. So that's exactly what we're just doing here, and I'm just doing a really basic building. We're using the rustic stone wall, same as we've got on the other staff facilities adjoined to the main entrance building as well. And one thing I really love about this is that you can recolour the doors, which is something that I only found out really recently actually. I don't know if it's always been in the game and I just missed it, or if it is a relatively new addition, but a very, very cool feature. So we can have everything in our Anima green colour around our zoo and have it all look matching and nice and no weird pink windows. And then we're just covering it in the basic corrugated plastic roof, but actually I didn't really like too much how this looked, although it does match what we did on the main entrance building. So I decided to cover it up with some of the metal plank roof, which because it's a little bit thinner, it sits really nicely onto the top of another kind of flat roof structure like this. And the reason why I really like layering this too, so we're covering up the white of the plastic, but we still get the beams and the texture underneath it, which I've mentioned in previous episodes as well, that I just really like. So I think it's important to look at how your roof looks underneath and above. Maybe less important for a building like this, but definitely one for when you've got an open roof structure that guests can walk into. So we're going to come back and do a hell of a lot of work on this staff area. This is just kind of me throwing it in for basic point now. In a few episodes time I'm going to do a big kind of backstage staff area where we're going to do large animal, a little bit of spoiler of what's coming up, large animal holding facilities, as well as detail out this staff area at the top ready for deliveries and staff comfort, everything we need around here. Lots of detail going to be involved in that, so that'll be in a few episodes time. And of course you will have just seen I have hired some staff as well, so we're now kind of fully functional and could open if we wanted to. But let's actually talk about the habitat that we're putting in here today. So this is going to be one for the red deer and the European fallow deer combined. So not like the most exciting animal to have as the first animal that guests are going to see as soon as they walk into the zoo. But I actually don't like having kind of big animals, you know, high profile animals right at the start, because then people gather up around there and it kind of blocks the entrance and it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. You want them to walk in and enjoy the rest of the zoo before they get to like the big feature animals. So we're going for deer here, which I think are entertaining enough, but also because of the environment that we're making this on a huge steep slope with what I mentioned last time, the big view looking down into the habitat and across the lake area that we're going to be putting in a little bit later as well. So I feel like it kind of suits the environment of the red deer and the European fallow deer, and of course they also have an enrichment bonus from being in the same habitat together, so it's kind of win-win all around. Now you'll see I'm battling away with these paths because yes, we do need to get obviously path access down towards our lake area. And I'd put in a holding path in the last episode, but actually I really changed my mind about that. The fact that it had steps didn't sit well with me. I wanted to make sure that this entire zoo was accessible, as I've mentioned previously. So instead of actually deleting the top out here, because I am going to be putting in a small stable building for our deer right at the top of the slope up here. So we kind of need a bit of a sharper angle down on the path to make it work. So we've got one little area with steps, and then this is me adding in the accessible route down the side. So anyone in a wheelchair or who wanted to avoid the steps could still access every part of the zoo and still get into that stable building, which is going to be up on that small piece of the sort of log pathing up the top there. And then of course I amended this slope down so that we didn't have any stairs from this point onwards, so fully accessible all the way down to our lakeside walk route. And paths, as always, are pretty finicky, so it was a struggle and I redid it several times, so I'm not going to bore you with the entire process, but this is sort of ish the finished build. I think I changed it a little bit from that point. And then what I wanted to do is add some cute signage, so I'm taking the same signage that we've used outside of the front of the zoo, just really basic, like plain kind of, you know, not highly detailed signage by any means, just the simple editable signs with a little bracket to point us the arrow to show the accessible route versus the lakeside route with the stairs down, which I just thought was a nice touch, and we'll keep adding these in throughout the zoo as well. Once I was somewhat settled on a path design, I decided to go ahead and just get our animals in so that we could start experimenting with the habitat Now, if you have seen my planetzoo beginner's guide series, you will know I am a big advocate of null barriers. I tend to not really use any of the default barriers except for in very particular circumstances. I really like to create my own and create a bit more of a natural looking zoo and natural barriers involved within that. So we're just running a null barrier all the way around the outside of our habitat here. And a lot of it actually will be kind of enclosed by steep hillsides, as you can see at the top, especially where the guests are going to look down and into the habitat. And I'm putting the keeper gate right down in the bottom corner because I do, off camera actually, add in a very steep path going down from the staff area at the top down towards where this keeper gate is on the side of the habitat. Now, this needs a lot of work, so it's not finished this episode. I do spruce it up in a couple of episodes' time. But I think like a little backstage path down the hillside from the main staff and deliveries area all the way down towards the actual lakeside kind of zone, if we're going to call it that, in the habitat was definitely needed. So that's what we've done there, and that's why we positioned it there. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually build their shelter. And really what I wanted for this was some kind of stable looking barn. A little bit run down, not super perfect, but definitely wooden by nature, lots and lots of wood in here. And none of the wood walls really suited the sort of theming that I wanted to go for. So I actually decided to use the East Asian wooden beams for this because they've got a really slight curve to them. So I think it adds a little bit of extra dynamicism in that sense, a little bit more kind of... it was man-made, it's not like manufactured in a plant and brought over here like wall pieces or whatever, you know. It's not made by some expert builder. It's a little bit more wonky and put together and kind of probably was here in the environment as part of something else before the landscape actually turned into a zoo. The one trouble with this though is they do look incredibly repetitive, so you can tell like the patterns on the side, and you can't really rotate them because of the slight bend in it. It starts to go really kind of wobbly and off. So what I will do later is come in and add some beams and decoration around the outside to try and cover up some of that repetitive pattern in those wood beams. Now at the front here, I wanted to have two little windows so that the deer, I guess, could look out over the rest of their habitat. Okay, probably not the deer, but you know, having some kind of light, etc. coming into the stable I thought was quite important. And I wanted the guest pathway to come right in, so you could come right into the stables and have a look at the deer having a sleep, having a little munch, or taking some shelter at least from perhaps wet, windy, cold environments, even though this is kind of the perfect biome really for what they want. So within that I actually decided to put some little seats in the back, and the same sort of trick that we used in the last couple of episodes to hide some of these benches away. I decided to use the Arctic beams here to cover it up and create essentially this long flowing wooden bench at the back of the stable, so it's not obvious that there's only two benches here. Like obviously the guests are only going to sit on those particular areas, but if it was a real zoo you could come in and sit on any part of it. So it's almost like an education tour could be taken into the stables, is what I was thinking, and have a little area to sit down while they have their talk about the deer. And because we're super close to the edge of a very steep hill up towards our food and drinks court that we built in the last episode, the landscape was a little bit bumpy, so I used one of the beams to create a bit of a step up to the bench. But I really like the effect of this in the end, and how it like works to cover up those benches and also be a functional seating area for guests if they did want to take a rest at this point. And I also really like the blend of the Arctic beams with the East Asia beams, like those slightly different colours in wood, which is again one of the themes that we'll bring in throughout this habitat. Actually, we'll use a few different colours of wood to patch things up and patch things together, like support beams being different to the East Asian beams that we've got all the way around the walls. So I think it works out quite nicely in the end, and I had made a mistake of putting in stone flooring which looked totally unrealistic, so changed that up for concrete. And then over the window areas, again mixing up the colour of the beams and the types of beams that we're using here, I decided to create a bit of a sort of shelter out of the Arctic beams. They're probably in reality a little bit thick for this. I'm not sure they would be supported because they look like big heavy beams at this angle, so maybe something that I will come in and change later. But this is the sort of design that I wanted to go for here, with these kind of shutters and weather shelters essentially over the windows so they could shut the deer away in particularly bad weather and keep them warm and cosy in their little stable. And of course we come in and patch up the gaps around it with some more of the East Asian beams as well. And then as mentioned, we come in and use some of the East Asian water wheel planks for this because they're quite nice and thin to form some sort of structural beam essentially around the outside of the stable. So it runs all the way inside and all the way outside around the building by the end, and it just adds a little bit of extra colour and also realism to the edges of those beams that we've got going round. Like, they definitely want something structurally keeping them in place like this if it was all put together with these individual beams all the way around the edge of the stable. So I think it's kind of realistic. But of course also the colour gives a bit of variation and also helps to, as mentioned, cover up some of that repetitive pattern that we see in those beams, which is really quite unrealistic. So yeah, we're not using any wall pieces at all in this entire building. So all of the different doorways, window elements, the window sills, everything is all made up of various different beams, and it is a combination of the East Asian ones and the Arctic ones as mentioned to give those different kind of colours of wood, which I do think is pretty cool by the end. And then a big thing with these planks as well is, like, it's nice to do something a bit different and not always use wall pieces, but it can sometimes look a bit unrealistic. I mean, some of the wall pieces look like this as well. So again, I went round with the Arctic beams and framed off the bottoms of all of the walls to give a bit of a foundational base to it, and created these structural vertical beams inside as well, just to divide up some of the patterns and also, again, create a bit of realism in terms of the actual structure of this stable. But these Arctic beams are also perfect for filling in the gap in between the roof and the top of the walls that you will see in just a second. So yeah, in terms of the roof, we decided to go for the corrugated iron roof. I think it has quite a nice natural, kind of low-key, stable vibe to it. Because it looks a little bit weathered, I think it suits what we wanted to go for here in terms of a fairly rudimentary type stable for this area. And for the top of it, because I was very conscious about not blocking the view from up on the main path coming out of the entranceway before you then come down into the lakeside zone, I actually decided to do a flat roof in the middle and the top of it, again with the corrugated iron pieces. However, they don't join very nicely, so I did come in and put some of the big steel metal girders around the outside of it just to cover up some of those weird gaps and again give it a little bit of structural integrity. Now, of course, you always kind of make mistakes in planetzoo, and I made the mistake of putting the roof on before I'd done the inside bit, which made it a little bit tricky to see everything perfectly. A lesson that I will always preach and never learn from, apparently, but there we go. So yeah, for the inside, of course, we wanted to add some protection for the guests coming into the stables to see the deer inside. So I decided to go for just simple mesh piecing with some of the European pack marquee beams. Again, these are super useful. If you haven't got any of these packs or you want to pick them up, please do consider using my instant gaming link, which often has much better rates than Steam, particularly when there's no Steam sale on. And it also helps support the channel as well, so check that out if you're looking to pick up any of these packs. But these European marquee beams are really incredibly useful, probably one of the best building items and one of the items I actually use most within all of the packs within planetzoo, just because they're super thin, can be used in loads of different circumstances, so really like how they look. So we've just got this simple mesh fencing. I added in some bedding into the habitat, of course, that's the main purpose of this little structure, of this building. I also added in the water pipe as well, quite like that hidden away, and I feel like it makes sense inside. Now you can see we've got the deer in. I'll talk about the deer and what we have in the habitat a little bit later on when we do the walkthrough. But by putting them in, I did realise as well that they could actually jump this fence, I think. So I decided to extend it upwards with a little bit of extra framing. So again, just using those European marquee beams and extending that structure right up to the top beam so that there was definitely no chance for them to escape or potentially hurt the guests, because I know the red deer, I think, are dangerous, but the European fallow deer are technically walk-through habitat animals, so much less dangerous to the guests in general. In terms of signage, I really do not like how big the default habitat signs are, however they are needed to provide education. So with this zoo, I do want it to be fully functional, so I am going to be putting donation bins in, as ugly as they are, all around the zoo, and of course trying to educate our guests so that they do actually donate. If you're struggling with money in planetzoo, that is my biggest tip, is donations, which is probably the largest source of income for your zoo, is intrinsically linked to education. So make sure you have loads of habitat signs, loads of speakers, that you've got information booths selling the walkthrough guided tours, as well as, you know, having walking tours when your zoo is big enough to handle that, and of course the education talks as well. Also, just having educators walk around your zoo, they do kind of impromptu talks to your guests too. So it's a good idea just to have educators just wandering around as well as actually doing the tours and the walks. And all of that will mean that your guests will donate more money if they're getting decent education, so that's really going to help. But you will have seen with those big education boards, of course we have to have them in to keep the education going, but I'm going to use the TV screens to act as our actual boards, and I hid the large ones actually inside the wall so you can't see them, but if a guest comes up to read it, it still looks like they're actually looking at our TV screens, which I quite like. Now, to kind of add to the educational vibe and what I mentioned about the big wooden bench that we've got at the back there, where school trips or groups could potentially come in and have a little talk inside the deer stable here, I decided to add a sort of makeshift keeper gate. Obviously the main keeper gate is around the other side, so it's definitely not functional. But to do that, I just recoloured some of the beams around this area, added a handle onto the gate, and I think it looks kind of pretty cool in the end actually. As a sort of simulated entrance point into the stables for the keepers there. And then to add to that effect, I put a few little buckets so maybe the keepers could come in and feed the deer while they're talking to the school children or the guests going round on the tour. And these come from the conservation pack if you haven't got that. Very useful item. And then because they're so close to the deer and could reach over the barrier really nice and easily, I decided to add in the no feeding sign just to make sure they weren't feeding our animals, but I actually decided to hide it away inside the beams of our walls so you can't see the stand for it, but you could still see the sign because I don't mind that too much. And so there we have our little makeshift stable, and now it's time to build out the rest of the habitat, and there's a lot of landscaping to do. So let me start by actually talking about the plan for this here. What I do want is I want a waterfall, first and foremost, to come down right next to our big slopey path down from the main walkthrough into the rest of the zoo. So the main entrance, I guess, into the lakeside zone, you could say. I want the guests to walk right past a really big waterfall, which has a river flowing underneath it, through the edge of the deer habitat, underneath the path as they walk across to the other side, and then into the lake, which is going to be right in the centre of this zone. So that was the idea I wanted to go for. This is absolutely nothing like Belfast Zoo, which we've obviously taken a lot of inspiration for the main layout of the zoo. I'm kind of going off on my own little whim on this because I had this big idea about this waterfall and this path running alongside next to a small little stream, a little river going into this lake. So that's what we're going for here. So you will have seen I've just kind of marked out where that river piece is going to go, and the lake we do come onto in another episode, so it's just the main kind of area around the deer habitat that we're doing for today. And now I'm coming in and placing in the big waterfalls next to the path. So what I am using for this are the aquatic pack waterfalls, the sort of prefab, pre-made ones. I find them a little bit easier to use than trying to terraform out different areas and using the waterfall effects on it. Particularly for this, where the waterfall is going to be particularly large, I think it's kind of easier and better to use these aquatic pack ones. And then we do actually complement it later with some of the effects as well, so you've got a bit more splashing water, particularly to cover up some of the rocks and the joins in between the different waterfalls that we're putting in here. But I wanted it to really kind of flow down off the hillside, so we've got multiple levels to these waterfalls, which I think is always like a really nice little effect. So we've got some smaller ones going up the top, and of course the really big large one falling down right next to the guest path. And I want this water source to kind of continue on throughout the zoo. So at the top of the waterfall we're going to be extending out the river, and the main entrance pass will cross over that to get into the rest of the zoo, and there'll probably be another waterfall down the other side coming off where we have the start of our hillside at least. A little bit next to our food and drink court in the background is the plan for that. So I want that river and that water source to continue on up through the mountainside, so it's like we've got this kind of spring at the top of the mountain that is flowing down and into the lake, as you would find in real life. So I want this to be a natural feature of the zoo and something that they have built the zoo around, as opposed to being a kind of man-made water feature that's been put in essentially at the last minute. Now, the one thing with water and paths is, obviously, it can be very tricky if you put a path over water and then you want to change the water and the water won't go back in. So what I always do is basically experiment whenever I put in water to make sure I can delete the path, put it back in, and there's no issues. So if I do want to change something further down the line, I'm not left without being able to re-put back in my water source for whatever reason, particularly where this is going to flow quite a long way through the zoo. So yeah, that's always a good idea. And also smoothing off your banks, because you can kind of find where water only sits to a certain level in this game, that it's a little bit tricky to get it in exactly how you want. So smoothing off those banks, lowering the edges of the terrain around the edge of the water is a big help to make it look a little bit more realistic. And now we come on to an absolute ton of rock work. So the way I like to do this is really start off with some of the larger rocks. So in particular, the number one rock that we're using from the tiger biome here. And I'm still not sure on the pronunciation of this. We're gonna call it tiger because that's what I'm used to saying. And I think that actually might be the correct pronunciation anyway, for my country at least. And then we come in with the smaller rocks around. And I think the best way to put in rocks is to turn random rotation on. Make sure you haven't got snap to surface on as well, and then just come round with random rotation on free move and just hold shift to lower it or raise it up and down. You've already got the random rotation on to turn it, and of course you could adjust that if you want a slightly different view for wherever you're putting in your rock. And then you can just go round and create these really quite dynamic rock faces using that technique. So that's really what I always default to for these. And again, yeah, starting off with the larger rocks, mixing in the smaller rocks afterwards. And as we have done in the last couple of episodes as well, I'm going to keep the theme of the zoo running through this. So mostly tiger rocks, but with some of those darker tundra rocks mixed in, just to add a little bit more kind of colour and depth to our rock faces. And then for an area like this that you can see is quite steep, I tend to default to the rock number 4, the big flat wide rock. And you can create some really nice sort of stepped layers using this. Again, exactly the same technique, so random rotation on, free move, just raising up and down as you see fit to fit them into the landscape here. And then we do exactly the same thing with the tundra rock, come through and add some of those in exactly the same way. And using that same rock piece in the different colours as well, I think also kind of adds to the sort of the look of it overall. So I do like to do that. So that's kind of the rocks around the outside and around the waterfall, but in terms of inside the habitat, we've obviously got a big, steep, very, very, very big, I've probably gone too big with this, but very big, very steep, open green field here, which is somewhat layered. So I've tried to do some little kind of flat layers within the terraforming, within the habitat. Again, we'll see this in more detail when we come to do the walkthrough. So what I do with the rocks is I focus on those areas where it's a little bit steeper. Make sure the deer have areas to walk around the rock faces so they're not having to like clamber over rocks, which is maybe, I don't think these deer are designed for that. Maybe a dull sheep or something like that. Or the alpine ibex for sure, but yeah, not the red deer or the European fallow deer. So we keep those to just the areas which are particularly steep to help divide up the habitat like that you can see now. And here I'm coming in adding the enrichment items to start off with, to make sure they're well spaced without the habitat, but also making sure that we're targeting areas that guests can actually see. So we want quite a lot of enrichment down close to the path running round the lakeside, but also quite a lot of enrichment up where the guests are standing at the entranceway, looking down over the habitat as well, so that we make sure we attract the animals to those areas and guests are going to be happy that they can actually see them. Because one thing I have found now that I have opened the zoo and checked is the guests kind of say that the view isn't very good because the habitat is just too big for them. But in actual fact, the view's pretty good in my opinion, so I'm kind of going to ignore their little whinges with this. We've got quite a lot of guests saying that it's good as well, so it's not every guest, but it does seem like an awful lot that are whinging that they can't see the deer, even though they most definitely can. Now in terms of tree placement as well, I didn't want to overdo it here. Like, I'm well aware that deer often live in forested environments. There's quite a few deer around my parents' house, which is near the New Forest in the UK. So a big forested area, but I can't obviously come in and block this habitat fully with trees, particularly when the guests are already complaining that they can't see the deer without the trees. So we're kind of going for strategic placements here, a lot around the edge, a couple of areas that can be a bit more sheltered, particularly the path along the lakefront as well. I wanted it to be so that you walk along the path and there's little sneaky peeks through into the habitat as opposed to it being completely open all the way along that path. So there's a couple of big trees there which block some of the views in around some of the rock work. to help provide that effect of little sneaky peeks through. But actually, really in reality, very few trees. Their plant needs are actually pretty high, so it's not too bad on that front. And I am paying, by the way, with all terrain needs on, so we will be paying attention to what they need from a terrain distribution point of view. From a plant coverage point of view, I'm unsure. I may turn this off a little bit later on because I find it incredibly restricting on some of the animals that don't like much plant coverage. And like literally hardly any, like you put one tree in their habitat and they're angry about it. Now I know that you can go overboard with the tree coverage and they won't complain too much as long as it's trees from their actual biome, which I will of course be paying attention to throughout this, or mostly attention to. But as much as I love detailing, I also like to kind of play the game at the same time. So we will be paying attention to a lot of that, but yeah, I can't say. I potentially may turn off the plant requirements later on if it starts to become a bit of a problem. But we'll see further down the line. So just in terms of the terrain painting, what I have done is gone through and tried to like imagine where the deer are going to walk, sort of desire lines around the actual habitat, and add a little bit of dirt texture to those to make it look like the deer are actually walking and, you know, have run down the grass in that area, and then grass really around the outsides, around the edges of the rock formations and areas that the deer would be less likely to walk through or spend time. So we want to make lots of muddy dirt, particularly around the feeders and the particular enrichment items as well, because they would definitely be high traffic areas. Now in terms of the fence, we need a little bit of fence to keep our animals in around our path down at the bottom, but actually they're fully enclosed at the back by all of the rock work and the slope of the terrain there. So this little fence, I've created my own one just using a piece of meshing, a couple of the Indonesian stained beams, which we just made a little bit more of a natural wood colour, and actually the African, is it the African pole panel, something like that, for the base of the fence. So we're using a big mix of themes here, but what I really wanted to go for was wood to match the stable ultimately, and to kind of match the theme of the deer being from woodland environments as well. So I feel like a lot of that wood works, and I really quite like how this little fence looks in the end. It does the job of keeping the view there, but also keeping the deer from escaping out onto the path. And in terms of finishing off the habitat, of course we need to add foliage. So I generally like to start with the larger kind of themed items, as you will have seen. So the rock placement to start off with, then we'll paint the terrain, then we'll add in the trees, and then we'll go for the smaller foliage, grass, bushes, that sort of thing around it. So I'm using quite a lot of the grasses which come with the conservation pack around here, because the long grass in the game just doesn't really do it for me. But I think it's kind of needed. And yes, I've maybe overdone it slightly on the flowers here, and I do come in to actually add in some darker plain grass in a little bit that you'll see a brief snippet of, and you'll see definitely in the end walkthrough as well, because the flowers may be a little bit much, but because they're all white I feel like it's toned down enough that it's okay. But I add in all of these grasses pretty much over most of our green patches around where the desire lines run, to kind of add to that longer grass effect without having too much of the long grass, particularly as actually the deer don't like it as well. They want more short grass, so that doesn't help. And then we've added in a few saltwort bushes around, and now some bracken as well, again keeping in theme with what we have in the zoo. And these animals are perfect for it because actually they're within their biome, their continent, so this foliage suits them, and it's also what we're going to use extensively around the zoo. So it feels like kind of just a natural slope in the zoo that has been turned into a deer habitat, which is really what I wanted from this, as opposed to something that's kind of big and man-made, which is exactly what we're going to be doing in the next episode. It's going to be a complete change from this, which is probably the best thing I like about planetzoo, is that you don't have to kind of stick to one solo theme and it can still make sense. So I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but you'll see that in the next episode. Total departure from what we're doing here today. And then final little touches are adding some more arrow roots around our rockwork, around our waterfall. There is an absolute ton of natural landscaping and detailing that I haven't shown you in this time lapse that you will see in the end walkthrough. So do stick around for that in just a second. But yeah, lots of arrow root as we've seen in previous episodes across the rockwork, just to add a little bit more nature into it and to kind of make this big grey walls feel a little bit nicer and a bit more decorated, but also natural and overgrown as well, which would be the case in reality. And then the final little snippet, of course, I'm adding in some of the darker grass as mentioned, just to take away a little bit from all of the white flowers that we've got going on around here. So I really kind of like how blending a couple of different coloured grasses in looks throughout this habitat. But that is pretty much the gist of the build. This took a lot more time than this episode actually shows you, I'll be honest, because the amount of rock work and foliage that was put into this was pretty epic. So let's dive into the walkthrough and have a little look around. Okay, so we're just going to start off in our gift shop, which still needs fixing. We do have the zoo open, so there's lots of lovely happy guests, as you can see in here. Let's go round into our entrance plaza, which hopefully you're familiar with from the last episode. And we can come up to the viewing deck now and take a look down into our deer habitat. And there they are. You see, like, they're saying they're too far away, that they can't see them, but I would say that's pretty good views all the way down to the little river that runs through it down at the bottom here. Now, of course, you kind of need to use your imagination. The lake is going to be right here. We're going to have other habitats as well in the foreground. All of this needs terraforming out into a more natural landscape. But I think, like, just looking down, it's kind of pretty cool at the moment. So, yeah, I'm pretty pleased with it. We've obviously put the enrichment items, or some of them at least, up here. So we've got the scratching tree. We've got this hanging feeder. We've got a ball. You know, they can see right down to the main food area down there, like pretty much across the entire habitat, actually into the stable here too. So I think it's pretty cool. I think once the lake is in as well, that will definitely add a new dynamic to it. And here we go, we run past our food and drinks court. Here you can see the top of the stable roof here, and this I love because it kind of preserves that view of the mountains over the other side. So you can walk past the exhibit house and now just see that beautiful landscape all around. Doesn't block the view too much from the food and drinks court, although they do have quite a few trees in the way now. So I may have ruined that a little bit. Just got a really basic fence here as well with some poling and some meshing. That's it, just as a bit of a safety rail behind our brick wall, which does have more benches in it, I would add as well. I'm also going to do this thing of adding paw prints around the zoo to show the direction that you can walk to walk around the entire complex. So starting off, of course, with the lakeside zone here. And here is our little sign. Just added in some very basic details here. So this is one of the aquatic pack faux rocks. I think I want to say number 6, but I might actually be wrong in that. A little bit of mulch behind with some grass, because of course all of this terrain was horrendous. Absolutely horrendous when I put it in. Like, there's gaps all around, so we've covered that all up with mulch patches, actually, with bigger rocks around it. Actually got a bin sticking out of the wall here. This is going to come on over across our little bridge into the rest of the zoo. There will be another waterfall here when I eventually put it in. And then I have done some nice little rock work and some foliage, reeds, grass, lily pads, etc. around the edge of this, which I love. And then you can see it just going down into the top of the waterfall back there. Really, really pleased with how this river's come out. Yeah, I really like that. And so here you can see these little mulch patches in action. So we've got a layer of it. Actually, can I climb up here? I can, there you go. So you see it sort of steps down with these layers of mulch patches in between the rocks. So it's all kind of flat on the top there, and I've used these faux rocks actually to meet up to the edge. I quite like mixing in the faux rocks with the regular ones. I think it sort of adds a slightly different dynamic, and particularly for something like this where it's almost flower beds. Yeah, I think it works. Like, it's a bit more man-made. So we're coming down the accessible route here, down into the stables. Of course, the stairs up that side. You can see the arrow route around all of the rocks everywhere. Yeah, really pleased with it. Also sort of made these makeshift information boards. And kind of just out of, I think it's the East Asia wooden planks. I might have to confirm that in the next episode, with one of the editable signs at the top here to read information, then some of our education boards on it. Come in, we've got this big long wooden bench, which yeah, super pleased with how that's come out. And then there's actually loads of deer in here. Wonderful. There we go, we've got our little keeper gate. I actually added another little bracket piece to make it actually look like it was locked. I think I lowered this all down as well from the actual recording in the end. There we go. You can see right into our little deer stable. Lots and lots and lots of wood pieces have gone into this. But you can kind of still see some of the repetitive nature of the main beams that we've used there, but it's not too bad. With all of the kind of structural beams around it, I think it sits in alright. So then coming on back down the hill, we come down to here, we've got another information board, because before we have a look at the waterfall, you can peek through into the deer habitat from here. And they do swim, so they do swim in the water. They do also come onto the top of the rocks right up here. They don't climb down these rocks, that's a little bit too steep for them. But yeah, they can technically swim all the way into this pool below. They don't tend to do that, they tend to stick in this pool over here. But it's quite a nice little shot into the habitat. You see the deer jumping around in the background. In fact, you can see one holding a ball right up there. Very cute. Very cute. And then on this side, we've got our waterfall. I will come out of explore mode so you can see it sort of from the top down view, but yeah, really pleased with that, flowing right out underneath into this pool underneath. In fact, we can come right up to it here, you can sort of see down that way. There we go. It doesn't like the frame rate in the waterfall, but there we have it. So yeah, if we continue coming on down the path, you'll see you'll get these like little peaks in, which is exactly what I wanted, into the habitat here, so we can see up to the deer this side. But then got this little section. There's something funny going on with the path here, and you can actually see where I've hidden an education screen under the path, which I definitely need to adjust. But there we go, so you can see right through into the habitat, right up to the viewing platform at the top, which I really like as well. Yeah, very pleased with that. And if they swim, they come right down up to here. More of those information boards as we go around, and then you can see the view's kind of blocked from this point, so it's meant to be that you keep walking through to get to these little viewing points here. And we've got one of the scent markers over here, so the deer do come right across this side, right up to the fence, which is pretty cool indeed. I'm really enjoying this view up towards the main entrance building here. Yeah, very much enjoying that. I love a layered habitat like this. It's kind of, yeah, just adds so much depth to it. Really love it. And then we've got a little bridge. This is all one water piece that comes out to here and will eventually flow into the lake. Of course, tested that we can remove and replace the water. No problem with this path over it, which is good news indeed. But yeah, there we go. We just keep on walking around and as much of the same. So we come down to here. We've got a few more enrichment items down the bottom this side. Hidden away the keeper gate down here, so it's not too noticeable behind these rocks. And then this is the horrendous pathway, which is going to change and actually be sat in going up to the top of the staff facilities there. So if we just come into standard mode quickly, you can see it's an absolutely ginormous habitat. Like, not gonna deny that. It's literally massive. But yeah, I really like how the trees kind of sit around the edge, and then there's just these few dotted around in the middle, so it keeps the view quite nice and open around the habitat. Oh, that's a cute view there. Oh, I love that. The deer jumping around. It does mean it's a lawfully long walk for the keeper to get around the habitat, but there we go. Yeah, you can see, here we go, we've got a deer around the other side. I did also come in and add some of the strategic little aquatic pack, small rocks around as well, just to add a little bit more depth around some of these more dirty, plain kind of parts to the habitat here. But I think the foliage has worked really well. Yeah, this archway, I actually added in some of the European archway bits to it. It's a pretty rudimentary, but it adds a really nice effect when you're looking down from here. And then I did add a small barrier in the bottom here just so the deer couldn't escape through there, because again, they can actually technically swim down here even though they choose not to. And then yeah, if we just take a look at the waterfall, this is how it's sat in. So it looked awful when you guys saw it. But lots of rocks up close to it in the middle, a couple more of the waterfall sort of splashing effects along it. That was probably not exactly straight to the edge of the waterfall, I've just noticed there. But that really helps to kind of bring this alive and make it feel a bit more realistic, especially the effects at the bottom on the water there. A couple of little rocks in the water too, I think it's always a nice effect. Yeah, very much enjoying that. You can see the stable sat right into the edge of the hillside here, so it's really kind of blended in, and then we've just used all of this rock work around it to cover up some of that nasty terrain that we have around there. And then yeah, really like how these little platforms sitting over here with the faux rocks around them. Yeah, very pleased with that. A couple of the fallen leaf decals as well in there, just to add a little bit of extra something to the grass. But there we go. Yeah, that is our first habitat into Anima Zoo. So yeah, just in terms of the animals, we've got 1 male and I think 6 females, I want to say, for each of them. So if you have any name suggestions in terms of what you'd like to call our animals, let me know in the comments below. As well, let me know what other animals you would like to see around the lakeside zone. I still do, I have built a few of them already, but I still do have some open spots available. So I would love to take your suggestions for what you'd like to see around the rest of this zone. So for today, that is going to be it, but if you have enjoyed the episode, likes, comments and shares are really greatly appreciated. And keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. I love to take them and I love to hear them, so thank you so much for tuning in, and I will catch you again next time. Bye bye!